Mr. Nikhil Kumar for Security Viewpoints for the Enterprise Architect.
The clicker works, right? You said
Clicker works.
what's up and what's down?
Left and right.
Okay. Copacetic. So, calls to action. What? Yeah, wrong button. So that's me. Much younger me. So anyway, but separately, the reason I pulled a picture up is because I have a very varied and different background, which kind of allows me to think differently. I'm a computer scientist, a biologist, an engineer, and I've sat at a board and written the code. I still do. Don't know if it's wise or not. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I try to make sure as we do these things that they're very actionable, that they're very pragmatic, and they're not pure theory. And Mark's seen that. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving here. So why are we here, and who's this really for, right? You know, one of the things that happen, I mean, you as the head of your, I guess, your security architecture function must be seeing it, right? People see it all the time in the industry. It's funny, I'm doing a webinar series under the Association of Enterprise Architects, which is like a sister organization to the Open Group, or child organization, whichever way you want to look at it. We get between 50 to 400 attendees every webinar. Why? Because people struggle with how to apply zero. They don't even understand what it means. That's why the roles and glossary is so critical. Has anybody been to like one of the sales exhibitions where every vendor says, we do zero trust? And then try to figure out, what does that mean? I just, for grins and giggles, went to the Boston Cybersecurity Summit, and instead of attending the sessions, I went and stopped at every vendor booth. I said, what do you mean by zero trust? Because every booth says we do zero trust. Now, Mark, you should be very happy. We have, the core principles have impacted and changed the world. So, concepts like adaptive access control and data centricity are now fully adopted by almost every vendor that I saw. Even vendors that sell networks, which is amazing. The second thing is that when you do the work, you don't know how to apply these things as an enterprise architect or a solution architect. I see that all the time with many of my customers. And security is not understood by the technology community. So they'll come to me and say, Nikhil, you're the security SME, go to it. Figure it out for us. I'm like, no, you're supposed to do your job. You're supposed to understand what it is. And the security guys will come and call me. I've had this conversation with the CISO and directors every other day. They're like, what exactly do we do? Can we go to the CISO of our client base because it's a regulated organization? And I'm like, sure, but at some point you guys have to understand you have to work with technology. You have to make this actionable. So that's part of the reason why we're here. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's an old adage, right? But people don't realize that. And they're, you know, Mark will, I mean, he didn't do it today, but you'll hear Mark talking all the time about left a bang and right a bang. Left a bang means you get shift left is what enterprise architects call it. And right a bang is really you're fixing the thing after the incident occurred. So we'll see what makes cybersecurity and zero trust difference, right? What zero trust is. Not many people understand it. We'll do it twice today, unhappily. And then we'll have a quick recap of terms. What are viewpoints, views, and capabilities? And the reason I call that out is I work with TOGAF certified people who should know what a viewpoint is, and they don't understand what a viewpoint is. They don't understand what a view is. They don't know how to implement it. They don't even know how to apply it. So there's a huge gap between the theory and the practice, right? The other part about it is security viewpoints for enterprise solutions and application architectures, right? We'll just focus on what those are, and I'll be giving you a quick, I'll share this with you. We're going to drive it based on our capabilities, right? And then we're going to take a quick look at Acme Healthcare, which, you know, Mark and I are writing books, right? And we're using examples, the Acme examples, to tell the story. I teach a course, and we'll talk about that also. But anyway, let's look at Betty. Betty is running this big corporation, and she wants to keep assets away from attackers. And Betty has got drivers for change. These are generally common, irrespective of who you're, what company you're in, what business you're in, etc. And they drive issues that you got to deal with: complexity, velocity, disruption, and adaptability. And I know we have a small audience here, but I have a quick question. I'm going to go around the room. Do the bottom drivers for change, which ones of these apply to you? None? One, two? Which ones? I'm just curious, taking a straw poll. Okay, that's one. What about you? All of those apply to you. What about you, ma'am? All of them apply. Okay, well, Jack, you think everything applies. Okay. But what drives this is something that you're going to see. Your business owners and your technology owners, and by the way, the attackers, to add to the mix, are all going to tell you that we need to do things faster. Everybody familiar with dwell time, right? So your job, sitting as a security architect, is to reduce the dwell time, correct? How do you reduce the dwell time? Think about it. But that's one of the things, velocity, right? The other thing is complexity. Every time you're going to add a new channel, you're going to add a new line of business, you're going to add new capabilities, and that means that you're going to have to deal with ever-increasing complexity. You're going to deal with disruption because, COVID happened and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, you can't operate if you aren't secure. And by the way, when you go to leaders, how do you sell it? We'll talk about that later. But anyway, so now I'm going to talk about whack-a-mole. I did this in 2020. My wife was a CISO then. And she came downstairs and she said, we have COVID going on, right? And everybody is working from home. And solar winds happened. She said, what the hell do I do? And I can't talk to her because we work in the same domain, and we have to have like separation of duties, right? Though we don't work for the same organization. So I said, well, let's think about a game of whack-a-mole. So that's where the concept of whack-a-mole, and then I put this into a post on LinkedIn. I did some research also. We found that more and more, you keep trying to solve, historically, security organizations always were trying to solve yesterday's battle. There was a breach, there was an incident either in your organization or somewhere close by, and you went and spent $1 million trying to fix it, right? But the reality is the attacker said, let's go to the next idea now. So while you prep yourself, the other breach starts. And there's a trend line for more money being spent and less returns being achieved. And that trend line started to impact how the world operates, and NIST actually published a statement saying that no agency has not been breached because of SolarWinds. And after that, they actually looked at our core principles and incorporated them in the last President Joe Biden's executive cybersecurity directive. This is your traditional view, the network perimeter, right? And this is today's view. People coming in from outside, people coming in from other networks, people coming in through SCRM, right? And industrialized attacker ecosystems, right? There's a ransomware as a service. Wasn't you telling me about that yesterday? The Russians are providing that. You can go buy that as a service. And now you're applying AI to continue the attack system. The problem is, the reason I'm going through these slides, and I will hit them one more time, is this should be a no-brainer, but people don't know it, don't understand it. And they still struggle with the old approaches. So what are these core principles? Assume breach and assume compromise. How many of you have gone to your leadership and told them that we should assume compromise? I told a senior, actually he's a board member of a large insurance company. He said, Nikhil, solve my problem. And I said, okay, I'll solve your problem. What is it? I said, you should assume breach. He said, you can leave my office. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, Nikhil, if you tell me assume breach, I have to go to the SEC and I have to file a federal thing and I have to wonder about what is my jail bail value. Because they're starting to jail CISOs. So he said, come out with a better term. He said, okay, well, we'll assume compromise. And then eventually, when you get breached, we'll assume breach. Sorry, I can't help that. So basically, that's a fundamental way, a shift in the way you think, and that leads to having to deal with reducing the threat space, the complexity conversation, right? Because you have the amount of money you have, the amount of human resources you can procure, and the skill sets you can get, they don't increase. So you need to look at that intermediate step. You need to realize that whenever you design your things, you have to include it in your approaches. And you need to reduce the blast radius. You use approaches, really, like JIT, et cetera, to get this done. I tend to require this in my training. When I teach the course, I require this with my students. I said, if you don't know what reducing blast radius means, you're getting an F, right? Because, again, it's a fundamental change in the way you do business, where you architect. Just out of curiosity, do you ask your architects to look at this ever from a reduction of blast radius perspective? That's good to hear. So what is different? We talked about assumed flavor. I'm going to skip this slide. Maybe not. It's just the bottom of this. Security must be system, and this is the big shift, right? Explicitly validated, right? And it should be system and data asset centric. The shift to asset centricity from network centricity is one of the most fundamental shifts that occur with zero trust. So let's understand the landscape, right? The threat landscape. What is your technology landscape? You have digital ecosystems. Every digital company has two things. It has data and stuff that modifies the data. It's not very complicated. The stuff that modifies the data, that's your system assets. The stuff that your crown jewels and your day-to-day bread and butter, those are your data assets. So whenever you design your zero trust policy, strategy, et cetera, think about how you're going to provide for these two things, correct? Make sure you understand that when you plan it, right? Think about vendors, clients, partners. In the past, you had internal services and external services. Is that true in a digital context, in a zero trust context? It isn't. You still think it is, but it isn't. Because you may need to include somebody in your architectural ecosystem very quickly. This became starkly clear to me about 15 years ago, 20 years ago now. I was dealing with a large bank, and they had, 1,500 applications? And they said, oh, we're going to do PCI compliance. And I said, how many years? And they said, 8 years. And then I asked my wife, and she said, you have 1.5 years, otherwise we're going to get divorced. You're going to move back to Boston. You're not staying in Detroit right now. Because I forced her to move from Detroit to Boston because all my customers used to be in Boston. And now here I am stuck for a while. So I said, okay. I went back to the customer. I said, we have 1.5 years to finish the project. Now, how do we finish the project? They were going down that old approach. We're going to build security zones, or basically, what SANS used to call trusted zones, right? But the reality is, the people who wrote the code were dead and gone. These are people who wrote assembler code and, an HP nonstop code, which is like an ADA variant and things like that. So I looked at the whole thing and I said, that's not going to work. So we went down a path of data tokenization, and we reduced it to 3 core systems that had to change. The rest of them were not impacted. And it's interesting to see that most of the banking sector has now moved towards format-preserving encryption of some form or the other. The next thing that came about was was the need to be able to protect it in terms of dynamic trust, right? You have because you can operate from anywhere, your channels are normally omni-channel today, right? You can have a chatbot, you can have a web app, you can have a mobile app, all of them being used, right? So you need to be able to deal with that, and you need to be able to defend those things. And then you need to be able to invest your crown jewels, the protection for the crown jewels as you go, right? So you need to be secure anywhere, and you need to be able to protect those security zones. And I'm not going to go into the details of that today because that's not the objective. But understand you need to think about this. We've talked about this in prior presentations and also in the Zero Trust snapshot for the reference model. These are the ways you deal with complexity, velocity. So when you talk about security zones, you're thinking about if I lose something and there's a blast radius protection situation, I can shut down one section of my network without impacting the rest. It took me 5 years fighting with different people, but my customer is now adopting it. Of course, that just made me a little grayer and balder, but that's okay. So why did we come here? You have different stakeholders, right? So when we talk viewpoints, how many of you, and just, I'm sorry, because you're the only one who was dealing with architecture that I know of. Are you working with security architecture too? No. What about you, ma'am? No. So you're the only security architecture person. So how many times do you have to go to executive leadership and justify setting up security viewpoints? Do you talk to your business architecture team or your enterprise architecture team? Yeah, that's a rare thing though, because we're going to talk about that in a minute. Most times I find the security organization does not have the liaison with the EA organization. And that gap leads to a lot of problems because you don't really know your business. You know your business, but you have not included somebody in the conversation. That's the technology team. And now you're secure by design, zero trust. And so this is the next step down. You start making sure that your architecture and your product architecture, by the way, is secure. There we go. And then you need to make sure that you implement this securely. I'm going to hit the 3 pillars that Mark spoke about for a quick moment, right? Because it sort of impinges in our conversation. There's a strategic pillar, which is basically about creating your roadmap. And in an agile organization, every quarter you should be updating your roadmap as you go. Well, depends on the company and the business, but fairly often. You have to think about the operating model. And the operating model includes multiple factors. The operating model includes how the company spends, the business operating model. If you don't understand that, you don't get support from leadership to spend on what you think is important. And then you figure out how you change the wing, the engine while the plane is in flight, because very few companies are greenfield. And you're building this in companies that have been doing things for 50, 100, 30, 20 years. And you're making changes, and you need to be able to make sure you actually execute them meaningfully. And one of the things we did early on is to create the Zero Trust Commandments. Why? Because the stakeholders here, go back to that previous slide, they're all the different organizational entities. So you need to have a unified understanding of what Zero Trust means, otherwise the organization fails, initiatives fail. I'm going to go through this slide a little quickly, but on your left you see why you design these things, how you design them, and then on the right you see the operating model and how you go about these things. And there are different elements in here. John, how much time? 10 minutes, right? So in a straw poll some years ago, 150 CISOs in the room, CTO of a large company was the chief guest, right? He asked the audience, how many of you have a good dynamic with your CTO or CIO? Put your hands up. Not one hand went up, not one. Okay? So the reality of what I have seen in the industry is there's a huge gap between security and technology. Security does talk to the business, rarely to the technology teams. They talk, and they have to, but there's a yin and yang, there's a continuous tension there. Security teams do not exist in silos. It's important to understand that, right? I'm not going to read through this, but the short answer is, remember, you have 3 legs to the stool, okay? And you have to be sure that you have those 3 legs operational and set up systems. That operating model has to be there, right? And remember that technology is the glue that enables this implementation, and we talked about prevention being worth a pound of cure, right? I'm going to skip the slide because we're running short time. Okay, that went too fast, okay. So there's just some terminology we need to understand. What are capabilities, ABBs, and SBBs, right? Capabilities, things you do, technical things you do. Architecture building blocks are logical entities. Again, people don't understand that. People who have TOGAF certifications don't understand that, sadly. And SBBs are basically realizations of those. They include constraints and things that you needed to factor in for your individual organization. So you could pick up capabilities and ABBs from our standard and tailor them to your organization by your business and technical and security constraints. And then you would come out with your SBBs, which would be not only product decisions. Please don't link it to just buying a product. Viewpoints are basically things you do to build different perspectives on an architecture. It's important to understand that. This makes your architectural review process consistent. It provides a point of interaction and integration between different stakeholders. Okay, we're stuck. And then you end up with architectural concerns, which help you curate that, right? And finally, architecture views are filled out viewpoints. You took the template, you took your viewpoint, and filled it out. I'm assuming you have a fairly defined governance process in a highly regulated industry like the insurance company industry. Well, highly regulated, I mean, it's defined or not, but you have a governance process. You can't really survive without that. So your governance process, your stakeholders will be complaining about how much time it takes, right? But the reality is, as you build out viewpoints, those become foundational for actually making this happen. I'm going to look at the capabilities very quickly. We have risk controls, which basically are an ability for you to understand what your prioritization is, whether or not you do it quantitative or qualitative, depends on organizational maturity and capability. You do need to establish a set of common controls. Most companies have those, maybe not, but you should have them. Asset centricity, which is basically the ability to go and define what your assets are, know what your assets are, know which assets should not be there. Not many people think about that part. And then make sure that they're in a proper state. Then you have the data and system assets and the ability to protect them. You have the adaptive access control, which handles risk-based, dynamic asset setup, and then digital identity, which handles decentralized digital identity. So you can deal with large communities of identity stores, which is the reality in mid to large-sized companies. The asset-centric SOC tends to be different in this modern world. AI comes in, threat intelligence comes in, posture management comes in, and zero trust governance comes in, and we're building out this whole SCRM and DevSecOps. And actually, Mark, I'm starting to put posture management as a parallel because it covers really all of these things. And I start asking every security architect when they go and look at their product and when they're involved in a review, what is your posture? Did you assess security posture? Did you do threat intelligence? Did you do threat modeling? I know we don't have the time to cover all of that. That would be a one-day project. But I want to pick up some speed here. Remember, most companies are being forced down the scaled agile or some other form of modern DevOps cycle, which is rapid. And you don't have the option of being slow. So you need to factor in secure by intent, design, and implementation. The role of the EA, strategy, governance, technology, systems, business architecture, these are the disciplines and these are the things you're trying to do, right? You'll be at the bottom over there, the security architect, right? And cross-cutting concerns. And what are you thinking about? How often, I forgot your name, sir, by the way. Justin. So, Justin, how often are you at the seat when the organization, when product does their quarterly product review or annual product review and starts laying out a product plan?
Yeah, we're engaged quite frequently. We meet monthly as a community.
What about the C-level and the executive management?
Our CISA, my boss is CISA, meets I think quarterly with his leadership.
Okay. So I'm not going to go into details about customers, but I have seen interesting stories. So you have to make sure that the EA has a seat on the table. You were asking me, Jack, yesterday about the EA, right? Well, if he doesn't have a seat on the table, you're not going to be very successful. Then EA becomes an ivory tower and people don't like it. So we're going to look at a quick example, Acme Healthcare. On the left, you see what they're trying to do. Integrate telehealth, incorporate precision medicine, evidence-based and value-based medicine, have system descriptors of health, social descriptors of health, have an holistic continuum of care, and an episode versus an encounter model. I don't want to go into the details. Not everybody over here is in healthcare. The point is really, I gave this as an example to give some tangibility to what you're doing, right? We keep talking about, that's your business strategy, right? Oops. Come on. Or not? Oh, come on. Okay. On the right, business starts wondering about jurisdiction, cost, and disruption. For example, payer costs can be suddenly changed, so the payments you get can suddenly drop. Cybersecurity is a continuous growing cost. I would say on average once a week, a hospital provider goes out of business because of breaches. AI is sweeping through everything, and almost everybody has heard about Gen AI. Many people have heard about agentic AI. Very few people understand effective computing, and almost none understand embodied intelligence. But they're all coming in very fast. So establishing that practice at a business level matters. The board should be taking care of this and thinking about it. These are the things that the technology team is thinking about. This is your technology strategy: cloud, precision medicine, ecosystem architectures, and speed to market, right? All these things are now starting to overlay what you do, and they're defining the strategies your technology team is following: cloud strategy, AI strategy, reuse and governance, ecosystem architectures. How many of you deal with the bottom two? I'm gonna run over about 5, John, just heads up. I'll try to do it as fast as I can. So, on the left, you see all those things that we defined in our capability reference model, right? We've added privileged access management, cyber resilience, SCRM, and DevSecOps. The rest of it, and where did posture management go? It got typed out. There should be posture management. I gotta fix this. But anyway, so posture management is one of the things also in there. Now, what you really do is against each of these, we have sub-capabilities defined in the reference model. So what I do with my teams is I define them as subsets of, right? And then we start applying them to stakeholders, business, technology, and the 3 legs, right? And start putting in things that you want to look for. Because if leadership takes this viewpoint, your business architect sits with them, and your security architectural stakeholder, and is able to convince them what happens here, you get actual outcomes because they fund it, they plan for it, and there are no sudden surprises. Now, there will be sudden surprises because of disruption, because the attacker has a say in the conversation. But outside of those sudden surprises, which you have no control of, you reduce those, right? What is your run the business cost and your strategic cost? You need to think about secure by design. How many of you sit down with the product team, and I don't think that would be your role because you're security team there, but if you're dealing with the architecture team, they should actually be sitting down and say, and actually the security team, sitting down with the product director or a manager and saying, hey, this is your strategy for implementing this roadmap from your business side. Have you incorporated the SOPs? Have you incorporated the funding? Have you incorporated the schedule? Have you included risk modeling? And I will tell you, very few organizations have that maturity, but bringing it into the conversation, crawl, walk, run, is very important, right? Secure by design. You need to start, the solution architecture needs to have the viewpoints here on the left, right? And you can use techniques which involve AI, which involve consistency and reuse. So what does that mean? We actually try to ask our customers, think about standards, patterns, and solution building blocks, right? Standards should be a responsibility of the security team, along with the risk. You want to define what are your standards in order to operate from a secure context. This is all about, this can apply to other areas, but this is for security. You need to think about patterns which are reusable mappings of those standards to specific technology stacks and use cases. And you need to think about solution building blocks that you build out over time. So to your question about the delay for technology governance and security governance, that's how you start answering that. Because if you follow those 3, you don't have to do much of a review. You still need to document it because people come and go, right? But on the flip side of it, And by the way, don't think this is going to happen overnight, because this is a learning thing and an organizational cultural change management thing. But it's important to be able to do it, and it also addresses the conversation of blast radius protection and complexity. Then you think about budget, velocity, and opportunity, and secure by design. Now you're thinking as a security architect, posture and threat modeling. Do you do threat modeling for most of your products? That's a good thing. Again, rarely seen, by me at least. Standards, patterns, again, because they apply to your business model and your cost model, by the way. I asked the security CISO and his team to always fund it. If they're not funded, we can raise it up with product and with executive leadership as a risk. And then you go forward to implementing it, and this is going to behave. Okay. Again, you'll say, why does business care about implementation? Because they need the SOPs, right? They need to understand that there's proper training and not just going to a class and going to sleep in it, but you gamify this. And then you have to deal with the laundry list, right? And, you know, I'm not going to go through that laundry list in detail, but you need to start bringing that operationally in. And each time you do this, you're bringing in this set to the left and applying it to the set to the right. Now here, this is how you implement things, right? And you're considering risk modeling, threat management, SOC and SOAR. I'm going to wrap with, I know we're out of time, so I'll give you 2 minutes before I will completely shut this down, and then hand it back to Mark and me. Actually, I think it's you, and I know it's Jack. Sorry, I'm running over 5 minutes on your presentation. So we will shut down in a minute. Any questions? Everybody's already figured it out. Everybody's already doing everything. Feel free to reach out to me or Mark, because we are both like, you know, it's the Mark and Nikhil show, so we are always glad to give you an answer. Whether or not you like it, different conversation. So, hopefully we kept this smiley. Take care. John, it's back to you.
Thank you, Nikhil.